investors have clued in that the world is collapsing, that the fiat currency model is no longer viable, that the world is headed towards complete total war. These nations will start to embargo each other, and global trade is dead. What happens in Iran will determine the world order for the next 50 years. And my prediction is that the United States goes to Iran, this war is drawn out, but the Americans can't fight this war. This will lead to massive civil war, civil conflict. The goal is not regime change per se. The goal is...
I'm here with Professor Xueqin Jiang, host of Predictive History on YouTube and Substack, and this is an urgent update on what may be a pending war. Welcome back to the show, Professor. Good to see you. Yeah, lots of updates from Davos we can go over, but we're going to go over today. But first, let me just talk about this developing story. Trump says an armada of warships is headed toward Iran just in case. He said on Thursday, so yesterday, an armada of U.S. warships is headed towards the Middle East as he continues to watch the Iranian regime's response to massive protests. Now, that began in late December. He did say a couple of weeks ago that if the Iranian regime took action against protesters, then he would use that as a reason to take action against Iran. And that's exactly what has happened. So now the world's watching to see if Trump would actually follow up on what he wrote on Truth Social. What is your reaction to a lot of warships headed towards the Middle East?
Well, I think there's a lot of indications already that a strike is imminent. So, for example, airlines such as Air Canada have canceled their flights to the Middle East, Tel Aviv and Dubai. And there's a lot of signals that a strike is imminent. The armada is being assembled right now. So we need to understand what's happening. So during New Year's, Netanyahu visited Trump in Mar-a-Lago, and right after that, those currency speculators basically destroyed the value of the real on the foreign exchange market, and that caused merchants to protest throughout Iran against mismanagement and corruption in the government. These protests quickly spread. And then there was violence against police officers, and the Iranian government chose to clamp down. And there are reports that tens of thousands of protesters have died. We have to remember that this is a classic color revolution playbook where you engineer an economic crisis. You have agent provocateurs embedded within the country that start to rally protesters, that start to use violence against the government. Now, what's happened that I think is not part of the script is that the Iranian government was able to jam Starlink terminals. And this is crucial because they use Starlink to communicate amongst the protesters, to coordinate amongst the spies embedded within Iran. So, Mike Pompeo, he tweeted out Happy New Year greetings to the protesters in Iran, as well as the Mossad agents walking beside them, right? So what the Iranian government did was basically they blacked out the internet, and that allowed them to quickly identify the Starlink terminals. And then they were then able to round up the Mossad agents. And so it was a brutal crackdown, but it's effective. And that's what actually delayed the airstrikes, because the idea was that as these protests are gaining steam, you launch airstrikes to sap the morale of security services. But the security services have stayed firm, and the regime is much more resilient and resourceful than the Americans and the Israelis imagine. But unfortunately, they are committed to regime change in Tehran. And Trump has said this many, many times. And so this is a culmination of events that have taken place this past month. But you also say that this is ultimately why the Israelis are so supportive of Trump. Remember back in the first term, Trump proved to be the most pro-Israel president in a long, long time. He moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is very provocative. He withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. He initiated something called the Abraham Accords, which was to broker a peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel. So, and then, of course, the most significant event was that in January 2020, he authorized the assassination of General Soleimani, who is the de facto ambassador of Iran to the Middle East. And in geopolitics, that is a declaration of war. So this is a culmination of events that have been taking place for the past few years, and we should expect airstrikes either this weekend or very soon afterwards.
But what ultimately is Trump's goal? Simply just taking over the government, regime change? We saw him do exactly that with Venezuela. And of course, his objective, which he was pretty transparent about, was taking their oil, probably among other things as well. But what is his other objective with Iran?
So after 9/11, Wesley Clark, a general, American general, on stage with Amy Goodman, he revealed that there's a plan in the Pentagon for regime change in 7 nations. Now, they've already accomplished 6 of these nations. The last nation is Iran. It's basically the last boss, the end game. And in each of these nations, America basically destroyed the nation state. It destroyed the state's capacity to deliver basic services like water and electricity. Libya, Syria are in a state of constant civil war, as is Iraq. So the goal is not regime change per se. The goal is to collapse the state collapse. Ideally, Iran will splinter into different states according to the different ethnicities. Iran is an extremely diverse nation, both ethnographically as well as geographically. So that's the goal. And the Iranians are aware of this goal because they saw what happened in Iraq, Libya, and Syria. And so the Iranian people and the government will basically fight to maintain their nation.
Well, Iran also controls roughly 20% of global oil throughput through the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe Trump is just doubling down on having a global oil supply monopoly.
Yeah, so the Americans actually oil sufficient. So oil is not a pressing need for the Americans. The goal really is to disrupt the possibility of a grand alliance between Russia, Iran, and China. So the Americans and the British, they are naval powers, and they've been the strongest naval power for the past few centuries. And the greatest fear is that a great power emerges in the Eurasian continent, because what this Eurasian continent power can do is connect the entire continent through railways, and that would negate sea power, and that would basically embargo America and Britain from global trade, and that would cause the collapse in the economies, because ultimately Britain and America are Ponzi schemes. And so the great fear among the Americans is that Russia is able to create this grand alliance between Iran and China. Russia has a military muscle, China has the economic resources, and Iran is really the pivot of the world. It's right in the center of the world. It has tremendous oil resources, as you say. And once they build this grand alliance, they're able to extend it throughout the Middle East. They're able to expand into India as well as Africa and into Europe. And it will be a fait accompli. So that's what the Americans are most afraid of. And so they are able to strike at Iran and create internal chaos. And it will be impossible for this grand alliance to take place. So I think that is the grand strategy at play here.
Before we continue with the video, let's talk about today's sponsor, Delete Me. Most New Year's resolutions fail because they require constant effort, but protecting your online privacy doesn't have to. Your personal information, like your name, address, and phone number, is often collected and sold by data broker sites. That's why I use Delete Me, a service that helps reduce that exposure. It takes about 5 minutes to set up, and then they handle the work for you all year. They scan for where your information appears and submit removal requests to hundreds of broker sites. I've been using it for more than a year now, and they have reviewed over 325 listings to see if any data brokers have my personal information, and they continue to check to make sure it stays off. Go to joindeleteme.com/DavidLin, link down below, or scan the QR code here and use DavidLin, that's my promo code, at checkout to get 20% off all consumer plans. Take control of your online privacy today before somebody else does. Now back to the video. Okay, so what is Iran's response to an armada moving towards the Middle East as we speak? And what is Iran's allies going to do to respond? China and Russia, are they just going to sit on the sidelines, Professor?
Right. So Iran's only play is an economic war of attrition. which will last many months, possibly years. Okay, so the idea is that the Americans will strike at critical infrastructure of the Iranians, including water and electricity. And the idea is to basically starve the country out, to stop them out, to destroy the state's capacity to do their basic service. Okay, so that's the American plan. The Iranian plan is to basically close out the Strait of Hormuz and inflict damage to American bases throughout the region, and to make it impossible for the Middle East to trade with the rest of the world. And this would ultimately destroy the Southeast economy. The Southeast Asia economies, Japan, China, and South Korea, are extremely reliant on Middle East oil. And this would force other nations to come into this conflict, okay? So it's possible that their nations will become belligerents. South Korea sends forces, Saudi Arabia sends forces. But it's also possible that nations like China and Japan urgently try to negotiate a ceasefire, okay? So that's a game being played where America is trying to knock out critical infrastructure through airstrikes. They will not send ground troops because that would be suicidal. And Iran is trying to strangle the world economy. And it's really a game of chicken, like who is the first to surrender.
When you look at the series of events since the new year, first it was Venezuela's Maduro being taken out, and then Trump threatening the rest of South America, and then Trump threatening Greenland, then making a deal with the Europeans to just put the Golden Dome over Greenland. So now I think that's off the table. But if you look at the series of progressions and escalations since January 1st, do you think that even if a war were to break out over Iran in the next coming days, would that be localized in the region, or would it spread?
Yeah, so if you look at the national security strategy of the Americans, which was published a month ago, it's very clear what the grand strategy of Americans are. Basically, the Americans were able to exert power over the world through soft power, through basically multilateral organizations like United Nations, through Hollywood, through the media. That's collapsed. Then they were able to exert power through their financial control, right? They have the US dollar. They control the SWIFT currency system. That's collapsed as well because of the war in Ukraine. A lot of nations have no longer believe in the credibility and legitimacy of the US dollar. So the only option for the Americans now to maintain their empire is to use their navy to control the trade routes of the world. That's why we're seeing what we're seeing in South America. So not only was Maduro kidnapped in Venezuela, but now they're talking about a blockade of Cuba. They're also talking about land strikes against cartels in Colombia and Mexico. They're talking about taking over Greenland. They're talking about making Canada into the 51st state. And so they're trying to control the world's resources. And they're trying to control trade access. And that is the last play of the American empire. So there's no way that this war in Iran is localized. It cannot be localized because too many nations depend on Middle East oil. And also, the grand strategy is really to strangle China economically. So this conflict will not only be in Iran, but it'll be in Europe, it'll be in Africa, it'll be in East Asia. So one major conflict that we will see in 2026 that will surprise people is the increasing belligerence between China and Japan. Yes. Not between China and Taiwan, but between China and Japan, and that will be a major conflict as well as they struggle against each other for control of the sea lanes, especially the Strait of Malacca, and that's really about control of these disputed islands in the South China Sea. So you will see flare-ups all around the world, and again, it's part of America's grand strategy to maintain their dying empire through control of trade routes.
What do you mean dying empire? What does that imply for the rest of global stability? In the past, historically, when an empire nears its end, assuming that's what you mean with the US, have they been usually more provocative in the tail end of their existence, and they've initiated more conflict worldwide? Is that what has happened in the past?
Well, so if you look at dying empires, their defining characteristic is their hubris. What I mean by that is that in the 1950s, up until the end of the Cold War, America tried to be a force for good in the world. And, Mark Carney talked about this in his WEF speech, where he said that in the beginning, we knew that this rules-based international order created by the American empire, there was some hypocrisy in it, there was fraud in it, but everyone benefited. And the Americans made sure to bring as many people into the coalition as possible and make sure they benefited, right? So the Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe. They went to Japan and they rebuilt Japan. They created these organizations that went around the world to help nations in need. They were the main benefactors of the World Bank, IMF. Okay, so America tried to create a system in which as many people benefited as possible. And yes, Mark Carney said there was a lot of fraud and hypocrisy to this, but at the same time, people did benefit, and so people pretended that this was multilateralism instead of imperialism. But as America became wealthier and as the Soviet Union collapsed, America started to become arrogant because it's the only game in town. And so it started to do things unilaterally. So, for example, the war in Yugoslavia, where America and NATO bombed Yugoslavia for no particular reason. It violated a nation's sovereignty, which is the core principle of multilateralism. Then, of course, you had the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Which again violated national sovereignty, and it made the United Nations look incompetent and utterly useless. 2008, America essentially bankrupted the global economy through its financial shenanigans. So America started to abuse much of its power, especially the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar. And America became this giant money laundering operation, and the people became arrogant, lazy, and corrupt, which led to massive inequality, which led to the co-optation of the political system by the elite. Both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party now serve the interests of the elite. But remember, like 20 years ago, before Bill Clinton, the Democratic Party was the party of the working class. I know it's hard for people to believe, but yes, the Democrats were opposed to NAFTA. They were opposed to most favored nation status for China. They very much advocated for human rights and workers' rights throughout the world. That's a long, long time ago. And now America is only interested in easy money. It's only interested in ensuring its dominance over the world. And so it's heavily in debt. It's $39 trillion in debt. It's overextended throughout the world. It's committed to too many military ventures in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Iran, everywhere around the world. It doesn't have the military capacity to fight. It is extremely corrupt. So, Trump has announced that the military budget will now increase from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. That does not mean the American military will be 50% more effective. All it means is that all that money is going to go to the corrupt military industrial complex through, all these big weapon systems that they will announce, like Star Wars 2.0, right? The Golden Dome. So that's the state of America. And these are the classic symptoms of an empire in collapse. It does not know it's dying. It refuses to die, and it lashes out at the world as it is dying.
What's next after the strike on Iran? How will it escalate? How will things change in the next couple months?
So Trump is very much concerned with optics, and the American military just goes along because before in Trump's first term, there was a lot of resistance from the military to Trump. So, for example, when Trump wanted to withdraw from Syria, the military just ignored him. But unfortunately, what's happened this time around is because of Project 2025, Trump has exerted control over the bureaucracy through personnel changes. And so the military right now is very obedient to Trump. So from Trump's perspective, if he launches these airstrikes against Iran, then Iran will will give up, and the mullahs will flee to Moscow. The people will rise up and install Reza Pahlavi as their new Shah, and the Iranian people will welcome the Americans as liberators. Okay, that's probably what Trump is thinking right now. He doesn't really appreciate that the Persians are an extremely proud people with a proud heritage. And these are Shia people who believe in martyrdom. They believe in eschatology. They believe that this is the end of the world, and they have a duty to God to fight the great Satan, which is America. So you will have, not everyone, but you will have a significant portion of the population who will fight to the death. So this is going to be a long, drawn-out war that America is not equipped to fight. The Americans really believe that this will be a repeat of Desert Storm, where they were able to decapitate the regime in 2 weeks' time. So maybe it's a timeline of 2 weeks, right, or a month at most. But they don't have the supplies, they don't have the will, They don't have the resources to fight a protracted war, which is what Iran is betting on. We also remember that Russia and China will not let Iran fall to the Americans, because if that were to happen, both of these nation states would be under threat, right? So Iran is the southern underbelly of Russia. From Iran, America could outflank the Russians. Also remember that the south of Russia, the Caucasus, is primarily Muslim, and that's always been a problem for the government in Russia. So there's no way that Russia would allow Iran to fall. China is in a similar situation where if Iran falls, the Belt and Road Initiative is dead. And the Belt and Road Initiative, the goal is to create resource independence, and resource supply chains. So if Iran falls, then China is basically blocked off, right? So to the west, you have Iran, but then to the east, you have the first island chain.
Let's talk about then, good segue, what will happen to the global order, or as Mark Carney, PM of Canada, says, a new world order. Take a listen to the first 1 minute of the speech in Davos at the WEF this week.
It seems that every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must. And this aphorism of Thucydides is presented as inevitable, as the natural logic of international relations reasserting itself. And faced with this logic, there is a strong tendency for countries to go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety. Well, it won't. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited.
I'm going to stop it here. Did he just insinuate that globalization has been weaponized and we should move away from that? Is that the rupture he's talking about? That seems to be consistent with the theme of the conference. By the way, Christine Lagarde, IMF director, also said, look, Europe needs to, ECB, head of the ECB, previously IMF. Christine Lagarde said, look, Europe needs to do a SWOT analysis and figure out how to be strong on their own. That seems to be the theme of this conference. People standing on their own. So can you just dissect what Mark Carney said?
Yeah, so Mark Carney's responding to national security strategy, right? So national security strategy, what the Americans said is basically, for decades, we've abided by multilateralism. And that really hurt America, because what multilateralism means is that Canada and Europeans, they're basically able to free ride off America. America provides the muscle. America is the largest market in the world. American consumers have to max out their credit cards in order to sustain these trade deficits with the Europeans and the Canadians. America is really the savior of the world, and everyone is just leeching off us. Okay, that's how Trump sees the world. And the idea of the national security strategy is screw that. Multilateralism should not be about exploiting the goodwill of the Americans. And so now America is going to put its national interests first. Okay, so what Mark Carney did in his speech at the World Economic Forum is like, no, you're wrong. That's what multilateralism was about. Multilateralism was about using the framework or the rubric of the rules-based international order for the American empire to exert its power over everyone else, right? Think about the massive standard of living that Americans were able to enjoy because of the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar. Think about the fact that our economies in Canada and Europe became your resource colonies in order to feed the endless appetite of America. Think about the fact that we stood by you in this war against the Soviet Union and now in this economic war against China. Well, that's done. If you guys refuse to acknowledge our contributions to you, then we need to move along and build our own system away from America. Okay, so that's what he's saying. He's saying that from now on, we are going to try to build a new international system that is able to best defend our interests, and that needs going against America. Okay, so this is a direct response to the national security strategy. So you need to understand this as a dynamic dialogue between America and Europe.
You've previously talked about this on my show as well. that America's about to lose allies. Is the China-Canada deal that we saw last week, where Canada, Mark Carney went to Beijing, made a deal with Xi Jinping, and the deal concludes that 49,000 Chinese EVs will be imported to Canada every year. Canadian citizens will be able to travel to China without a visa, and in return, Canadian farmers can sell canola oil, among other things, to China. That's just a high-level framework of the deal that was reached. What does that signal to you? Does that signal defection of an ally, which is what you talked about earlier?
Okay, so there are two ways to perceive what's happening, okay? And I think both ways are legitimate. The first way to perceive it is that Canada understands that America is now its greatest threat. And so it's trying to diversify its economy because, Canada exports 77% to America. So it's a very dependent economy. It exports about 4% to China. Okay. So look, Carney thinks that the best way forward, the only way forward is diversify the economy. So you bring in the Chinese, you bring in the Qataris as investors. Okay. So the goal is not to open up the Canadian market. The goal is to bring them in as investors, as a counterbalance to American FDI, which is actually leaving the country. Okay. So that's one way to interpret it. But another way to interpret it is this, and I think this is far more controversial, but I think it's far more relevant to what's going on, which is to say that Carney is not the Prime Minister of Canada. Carney is an agent of transnational capital, which controls Canada. Canada's not really a nation state with sovereignty. Canada's really a resource colony of the British, the City of London. What the British see is a toxic asset, because you look at the fact that 40% of the Canadian economy is based on real estate speculation, and housing prices are now cratering because immigrants are leaving because there are very few economic opportunities. The capital and talent are leaving the country. Productivity is at zero, according to Bank of Canada. You have a pension crisis where the pension system is going to suck up all Canadian resources, and the boomers are not going to die. You have the fact that 22% of all Canadians work for the government in some capacity. Entrepreneurship is dead. You have a bloated regulatory state. There's economic degrowth in the world. The global economy is going to shrink, which will dampen demand for Canada's energy resource. Okay, so Canada's become essentially a toxic asset. And what you do with a toxic asset is you dump it on foreign investors, and that's the Chinese and the Qataris and the Americans. Okay, these are the three major buyers of Canada. And what Carney's going to do is asset ship Canada and sell its pieces off to these three different groups. Alberta goes to America, different parts of Canada will go to the Qataris and the Chinese. That's the goal, okay? And how you will know is, first of all, Carney's going to call an early election, and he's going to get a majority in Parliament. And then what he's going to do is enact this agenda. And one thing that he's going to do very quickly is introduce digital ID, right? So they're talking about, introducing this law to prevent minors from accessing social media, which is what they've done in Australia and England as well. The goal is to bring digital ID, because can you verify someone is underage because of a digital ID, right? And it's all to protect our children, okay? So don't worry, it's all to protect our children. When you have digital ID, you can then create digital currency, which allows for financial repression. That's the angle. We know this because of what's happening in China, okay? These Western nations like Canada, Europe, Australia, is following the Chinese playbook. And quite honestly, I live in China. I'm telling you, it's very effective. If you want to control people's behavior, you want to control how people think, you do so through digital currency. Because if you say something you should be saying, well, guess what? You can't use your money for a week or whatever. Okay, it's very, very effective. It's nudging. It's not the police don't come visit you, but for whatever reason, your bank account gets frozen for a couple of days. Okay, so that's the grand plan in place.
What do you think China's playbook is now that Trump has made very clear what his global agenda is? The Done Road Doctrine, Western Hemisphere under his control, right? Expansion into Europe, expansion into perhaps even the Middle East, more so than his predecessors. Does China want to counter this by taking America's allies or building its own NATO?
Okay, so what Trump wants is submission from China. Okay, Trump doesn't want regime change in China. It doesn't want to destroy China, because ultimately China and the United States are codependent, right? So because America relies on Chinese manufacturing, and there's really no country that can replace the manufacturing capacity of China. What Trump wants ultimately is access to China's household savings, right? So Chinese consumers save the most of all nations in the world. The household savings rate in China is 40%. In comparison, that would be 5 to 6% in an OECD country. Okay. Also, the Chinese are not as burdened by debt as much as they are, as much as European and Canadian consumers are. I think for Canadians, I think the income to debt ratio is about 100%. Okay. So Canadians owe more money than they make. It's kind of ridiculous. Okay. So basically the Canadians, the Americans, the Europeans have maxed out their credit cards. The Chinese have not. So what you're trying to do, if you're Canada, Mark Carney, or if you're, England, Starmer, if you're United States, Donald Trump, is that you're trying to access the household savings market. Okay. And you can do that through three mechanisms. And I think this is what Trump will discuss with China when he visits in April. The first mechanism, of course, is through real estate. So that's why Mark Carney wants to welcome Chinese capital into the housing market to basically save the Ponzi scheme that is the Canadian housing market. That's number one. Number two is education, right? So to get Chinese to send more kids to college in America and Canada. So Trump has talked about doubling the number of Chinese students in American universities from 200,000 to 600,000. And the reason why is if it were not for these Chinese students, the American higher education system would collapse. It would go bankrupt. And that's what we're seeing in Canada right now, where because these foreign students are leaving Canada, you're seeing bankruptcies among Canadian colleges. Okay. So that's the second mechanism. The third mechanism, which is most important, is that you have stable coins. Stable coins are, digital currency offered by corporations like Google and Facebook, Apple, that are backed by U.S. treasuries. And so, the Russians talk about this, where America wants to use stable coins in order to offload its debt onto the rest of the world. Really, what they're trying to do is offload this debt onto Chinese consumers. Okay, so that's the plan in motion.
Well, let's take a look at what Trump has done in the past couple of days. He instituted a board of peace. Let's take a listen to the first 30 seconds of this.
Well, this is a very exciting day. Long in the making, and many countries have just received their notice, and everybody wants to be a part of it. And we'll work with many others, including the United Nations. But I want to thank you all for being here. Yesterday, we had an incredibly successful visit with many of the world's top business leaders, the best, the biggest, most successful, and foreign heads of state. And now we have one of the most important meetings of all, the official formation of what is known as the Board of Peace. I want to thank the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner, and their extraordinary...
First of all, not all member states or nation states have accepted the invitation. And in fact, Trump was pretty clear in not inviting everybody. In fact, he said Canada will not be a part of it. It looks like he's trying to create his own United Nations, except not really. What is this?
So look, Trump, if you want to understand what Trump is doing, just look at his past actions, right? So when he moved to Palm Beach, he tried to join the most exclusive social club, country club in Palm Beach. And they said, no, because you're new money, you're crash, you're a clown. And so he got pissed off. So what did he do? He started his own club called Mar-a-Lago. And that's the origin of Mar-a-Lago, right? So for Trump is not trying to create a new world order. He's trying to create a Trump-based world order, right? So remember, in his first term, he went to the United Nations. And I'm not sure if you remember this, but he gave a speech about Nord Stream and how the Germans were now too reliant on Nord Stream. And if you just go on YouTube, you'll see that at the very back, these German diplomats, okay, were laughing their heads off, right? So for Trump, whenever he enters these settings, whether it's the UN, it's a humiliation ritual for him, okay? So his strategy is, what, screw you guys, I'm gonna start my own Trump world order. Okay, and that's the goal for Trump. And the Board of Peace is just an indicator that he's moving towards this direction. And you know what? This Board of Peace, I would not be surprised if Vladimir Putin were to join. The Chinese have said no. The Canadians have been kicked out. But I wouldn't be surprised if Vladimir Putin were to join this Board of Peace.
Yeah, and it's just... The media have pointed out that most of the signatories so far are actually on Trump's immigration ban list. So let's see how this goes. Previously, you told me on the show that this AI bubble was engineered and the economy is headed toward disaster. Now, today we're speaking, it's a historic day because gold and silver have reached $5,000 and $100 respectively. People have been calling for this for literally 4 decades, and it finally just came all of a sudden, really. It wasn't like a slow, gradual climb. It was like all of a sudden we have $50 silver, then 80, then 95, and then 100 in a matter of weeks. What do you think these metals are signaling, if anything?
I think that they just signal that the investors have clued in that the world is collapsing, that the fiat currency model is no longer viable, that the world is headed towards complete total war, that these nations will start to embargo each other and global trade is dead. Like we're seeing literally the end of the world. And that's what, this rush to these precious metals signify. I think it's that simple.
What's going to happen to the economy on a high level once we have more kinetic conflict? I mean, war has been seen in history, throughout history, as actually, in some cases, being a boom for the economy and offering industrial output potential. So what do you think is going to happen next?
Well, I think that the world is run by transnational capital. Okay. So just think you're an investor and you know that you have a building that you put a lot of money in, but it's broken down and you would have to spend $1 billion to renovate it. And quite honestly, it's so dilapidated that the building costs are no longer relevant. So what do you do as an investor? What you do is you hype it up, you sell the apartments at a discount, you oversubscribe it, right? So maybe there's 100 units, you sell 10,000 units at a deep discount, okay? And the next thing you do is you burn down the building, right? So that is what's going to happen to the world. Transnational capital is going to try to milk as much money as possible through Bitcoin, through, AI, through speculation. And then they're going to try to hide this capital in a safe place. And then they're going to burn down the Western world. Civil war in Europe, civil war in America. Canada gets absorbed by the Americans. War everywhere. Okay. This is literally what the plan is, to burn down the world.
Okay. Is there a new world order that comes out of these ashes, you think?
Yeah, so my argument is that the new order will be Pax Judaica, where the center of gravity will become Israel. And the goal and the idea is that after this war in Iran, the Middle East will be peaceful the next few decades, because basically the entire Middle East has been destroyed, okay? Iraq, Libya, Syria, RMS, the Israelis will probably go after Turkey at some point and Egypt at some point, and this will establish the Greater Israel Project. And so you've got this huge territory that is virgin territory because it's all been destroyed. Look at Gaza, right? Gaza's been bulldozed. It's not a war. It's demolition. And so now you can build real estate on the cheap. So what you do is you bring in millions of cheap immigrant labor from India, China, and the Philippines to rebuild it. And all this transnational capital floods into Greater Israel because they have nowhere else to go. And the rest of the war is at war and in complete chaos. So you just, feed them capital, you feed them weaponry, you feed them, intelligence. And that's a new world order.
Yes. So let me just end on this note. You've got a lot of different theaters of potential conflict happening around the world. You've got South America. The Europeans are struggling to push back on Trump. If that's all theater, we can discuss that. Maybe behind the scenes, they're all just working together. Who knows? And then there's the Middle East that you've talked about. There's China and Japan, not just China and Taiwan. Which of these theaters do you think is most consequential from a geopolitics standpoint that could really shape the world dramatically?
Yeah, I mean, number one, of course, be Iran. What happens in Iran will determine the world order for the next 50 years. And my prediction is that the United States goes to Iran, this war is drawn out, and the Iranian nation state is devastated. But the Americans can't fight this war. This will lead to massive civil war, civil conflict. And we're already seeing that in Minnesota right now, right, in America. And the American military will have to withdraw from the Middle East. CENTCOM will then be folded into the IDF, and that will establish Pax Judaica, the Greater Israel Project. So I think Iran is most consequential, but I think it's also the toughest enough to crack. It'll be the most drawn out. I think second on the list will be this conflict between China and Japan, which will emerge. Japan is very, very serious about maintaining its independence. And that basically means maintaining freedom of navigation. So if China were able to occupy Taiwan, China could basically embargo Japan, and the nation would starve to death. It would literally starve to death.
Well, they could do that right now. Why do they need Taiwan for that?
No. Taiwan is part of the first island chain. And so they're under American protection, right? So, and China doesn't have the military capacity to actually invade Taiwan. But over time, the great strategy is to economically absorb Taiwan back into China so that the Taiwanese are economically dependent on China, and therefore they have to just obey China. And the Japanese see this as a distinct possibility because the Americans are basically withdrawing from Southeast Asia, right? Because Americans have, in their national security strategy, basically said, we cannot fight China in Southeast Asia, but we can blockade China throughout the world. And then, so what they're going to do now is they're going to promote Japan as the main adversary of China in Southeast Asia, right? And, yeah.
Does Trump's America First strategy mean he's going to pull out more from the Pacific and be less engaged in China and Taiwan in that issue?
So America First means basically to put American nationals' interest before everyone else. And so you can see the idea of America First, MAGA, as a counter narrative to multilateralism, right? And multilateralism these past 40 years really propped up the global financial elite. That's why, if you actually go and look at these speeches from Jamie Dimon, from, Christine Lagarde in the World Economic Forum, it's one of despair and gloom. They know this world is dying. They know that this world of, global financial cooperation, it's dead. And so what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to destroy the global financial elite and establish an America First policy where American interests come first.
And then finally, you mentioned this idea of a civil war. Should America press this war on Iran for a sustained conflict? How does that play out?
Well, there are many vectors to the civil war. Okay, we're already seeing it unfold in Minnesota. Okay, and so the first vector, of course, is between the federal and the state. Okay, who has authority in Minnesota? Right, Trump is saying that you people in Minneapolis are fraudsters. You have been stealing from the federal government for many, many years to fund this democratic corrupt machine. Okay. And that's why he's sending these ICE agents into Minnesota to arrest these Somalis who were responsible for the corruption in Minnesota. Okay, so that's one vector that's going on, right? The Democrats versus Republicans, state versus federal. But also another vector is one of culture. So remember the Rennie Good shooting, right? Where this ICE officer shot 3 bullets to the head of Rennie Good. You can see this as a fundamental conflict between two divergent visions of America. So Rennie Good represents the liberal suburban woman vision of America, of DEI, of liberalism, of globalism, and the ICE officer represent America First, of white conservative men who wanted to be dominant. Okay, so just look at the video of that Rennie Good shooting. The ICE officer who shot her, he was not afraid. He was trying to assert dominance and say, it's my time, it's my world, I'll do whatever I want right now. Okay, and that's why you're seeing such a complete hatred and conflict right now in Minnesota, because it's a violent conflict between these two worldviews. Okay, then you have this war overseas. So you have these peace protesters who will march again, and then you'll have Trump trying to secure a third term in 2028. You have election rigging in the midterms in November. So look, this civil war is going to clear up over and over because there are all these like polarized issues in America that have never been redressed, and they are going to come to a climax over the next few years.
Great. Well, thank you very much for this update, Professor Jiang. Where can we find you? I mentioned you have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, so I have one YouTube channel. Like, I know there are lots of YouTube channels that purport to be me, but no, I only have one YouTube channel. It's called Predictive History. And so you want to listen on my lectures, please look at Predictive History. If you're interested in my geopolitical analysis, the best place to find me is my Substack, predictivehistory.substack.com. That's where I will update you on the geopolitical situation and provide context for major current events.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Professor. Professor Jiang will put the links down below, so follow Jiang on Predictive History there. Take care for now. We'll speak next time.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.